Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Unrealized Purpose podcast. Today we have a special guest, Luke Hastings. Luke, if you wouldn't mind telling us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Absolutely. Thank you. Stoked to be here. Yeah, my name's Luke Hastings at Narrowwayman on Instagram. Twitter's best kept secret right now with 4 followers on there, and then narrowwayman.com as well. So I kind of got into all this just from a place of pain, from a place of what does it mean to be a man? And those questions I started asking myself probably about 15 years ago when I was 15 years old, and really came to a head over the past year or two and launched into this Instagram account just talking about men's issues. And I now do full-time men's coaching and content creation toward men. So that's what I'm about, man. It's been a transformative journey for me. Like I said, kind of birthed from a place of pain and questioning. And now it's kind of a hero arc of, hey, I'm going to try to help others, instead of getting burned by it and just staying hurt.
Yeah, that's awesome. Kind of curious, man. How did you find your calling? Was it all just from a place of pain, and then you kind of just dabbled around with it on sharing your message, your journey on Instagram?
Yeah, no. So it's really pain and a lot of questions since I was young. I remember when I was 15, there were 2 things that really got my attention. And one was this idea of discipline. I was kind of obsessed with discipline before it was cool. Um, it's really cool and trendy to obsess with discipline now. But for me, I've always been kind of a performer, like achiever, trying to hit metrics, trying to be the best at whatever I'm doing. And I would get a lot of, hey, you seem really disciplined. You seem like you're on your stuff. But I wouldn't necessarily feel that way. I would just feel kind of this drive, this motivation to push through and to accomplish things. And so I could never put my finger on what that was. I was very introspective as well as a kid. So, and then the masculinity side with that was, what does it mean to be a man? Like when I was 15, I was like, okay, I'm turning into a man. I was kind of a late bloomer, but physically I'm turning into a man. Great. This is awesome. But what does it mean to be a man? How does one become a man? When does that happen? Is it an age that you reach? Is it, do I have to wife somebody up and maybe have a kid too? Like, how does that work? Right. And I never found satisfactory answers to those questions. Out of the gate, kind of out of college, I graduated a bit early. I was into powerlifting, pretty fit guy. I was leading worship at church, doing Bible studies, had a decent career path ahead of me at the Walmart headquarters here in Bentonville, where I live. So on paper, I was doing pretty good. Found a beautiful young girl from a Christian family. We got married. I was 22. She was 19. So from the conservative side, everything was, man, you guys are crushing it. When are the kids coming, right? That was kind of the next thing. So, 2 years into that, I think things started to kind of unravel. Not that they were super raveled to begin with, but there was this discovery of, hey, we're kind of both having these coming of age things that are happening. And we were both raised very conservatively, and we both had bits of ourselves that we'd established, like this is who I am versus this is who my parents wanted me to be, or this is who my church wanted me to be. And I would say I had a little more of that than she did. She was very much a free spirit, nonconformist type of person, which I liked. But that entailed, needing to really find herself quite a bit more, because a lot of the boxes she's being put in as a child, as a young adult, were not boxes that she wanted to stay in as she kind of grew up. And that kind of happened as we were married, kind of in our early years. Long story short, those kind of self-discovery, finding self, testing beliefs, testing ideals, adopting, rejecting different ideas, that all happened over the course of several years. And, we grew apart, and ultimately, even though I didn't want it to end, it ended. And I believe, Jesus and the work of the Holy Spirit can certainly mend just about anything that he wants to, and there's definitely biblical grounds for divorce that can be at play. But, I think even with that, sometimes, a lot of times there can be healing, but that wasn't the case. And through that is where all the pain that I was alluding to, that's where that came from, is that whole process of me just desperately trying to save things, me trying to hyperspeed my own sanctification to try to fix things, to try to make everything better, and just figuring out female nature, dude. Just dealing with women. They're different than us, man. They're not the same. And so, not always known that on paper, but just dealing with that quite intimately, quite daily, inescapably, was a different story. And I found a alarming, disturbing, concerning lack of help with that in Christian literature and in Christian circles. There was all the kind of, hey, love your wife as Christ loves the church, look at, 1 Corinthians 13, give that a good read, lead your family, all these things. I'm like, yeah, dude, I know. But like, how do I handle it when, my wife is not aligning with my beliefs, like at a core level? Like, what do I do there? Or what do I do when, I have to make a decision and I'm 51% sure we need to do something as a family and she's 1,000% sure we don't? What's my role there? And it's not a sin issue. It's not black and white, but I'm like 51% sure yes, and she's 1,000% sure no. And there's kind of a tornado going on here with her emotions, and I don't know what to do. Right? I didn't get those kind of answers, man. And so healing from all that has brought me to this place of, hey, actually, there's a lot of guys that are struggling with this kind of thing, not just in marriage, but just with life in general. And it ties into who you are as a man first, and it ties into who you are in Christ and your identity, being kind of the grounds that you can build these other things on top of, including feminine relationships. So that's the long story short of it, man. That's what kind of launched me into all this.
Wow. Dude, I got so many questions right there. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
uh,
It's a
yeah,
lot.
yeah, dang, we had a bit of a similar story too. I mean, we got married 18, 19 years old, and then got thrown into the real world.
Mm,
You grow up as
yeah.
in that religious environment. You get those boxes put on you, and
Yeah.
you get the limits that are good, but at the same time, you never experience anything but the safety of the limits, and then you're just thrown into the cycle of figuring life out, essentially. Getting right into the first question here, man. Like, what is masculinity to you? And do you believe that the world has labeled it toxic, even though it is probably the way it should be? I mean, I feel like there are definitely toxic masculinity, toxic femininity, but what is
Sure.
what is masculinity to you?
Yeah, masculinity is, this is such a good question. Masculinity is two things. It is an energy, or sort of a demeanor, if you will, a way of thinking, a framework, and then it is also a calling. Okay, so it is not the presence or absence of XY chromosomes. It is not a beard. It is not muscles. It is not guns. It is not a deep voice. It's none of those things. It's not even maleness. It is a frame, a mindset, and an energy that both men and women can adopt, if we're being honest. Good things happen when men adopt it in the context of marriage, and bad things happen when women adopt it in the context of marriage. Specifically, the calling of masculinity is one issued by God in the context of, again, in marriage, right? Christian masculinity is definitely less of something that is prescribed in Scripture than it is exemplified. In Scripture, when Paul famously says, act like men, right? He doesn't have to qualify what that meant to that culture, because that culture is already intimately familiar with manhood and what men typically do. And that can vary from culture to culture. In our culture today, we have a very weird bubble of time, a fraction of a percent of human existence, where we have the luxury to abandon traditional roles that have served men and women for thousands of years. This idea of, oh, if I want a hot bath, I just turn a knob. Whereas literally just 150 years ago, no, you need to go chop down a tree, turn that into firewood, and then heat up several, pots of water, pour that into a basin, and now you have a hot bath. And that's typically a man doing the lion's share of that work, right? It's just so different nowadays. And the men that do those kind of jobs are now sequestered into factories or plumbing vans or whatever it is, right? So masculinity in its essence is the calling of God upon men in the context of marriage and society. And then it is fleshing out that calling in sort of this energy of, I'm stable, I'm grounded, I'm going to lead, I'm going to protect, I'm going to give. I'm going to provide a container for the feminine to be her fun, vibrant, bouncy self inside of. I'm going to provide a container almost like a firewall, almost like a fire line that wildland firefighters will dig to kind of prevent fire from going out of bounds. You can imagine femininity as that fire that is beautiful and powerful and can be a lot of fun, and that men are always attracted to, right? We're a bunch of pyromaniacs. But if we don't have a framework and a structure for that fire to stay in, it can become dangerous. It can hurt people, right? And so we need each other in that sense.
I like that comparison. The,
Mm.
the fire comparison. That's interesting. Do you have anything to add there, Dalton?
No, I was just gonna ask the question for the ladies out there is what are some areas that it's okay for a woman to be masculine in, or are there areas that it's okay for a woman to be masculine in?
Yeah, I'm going to answer that by kind of taking it the other way too, of like, I think a lot of men would have trouble with David of the Bible. If you look at David, a lot of men are going to focus on, oh, he killed Goliath. He was this mighty warrior. He was a king. He had to be a great leader, checking all these boxes of masculine stereotypes, right? But he's also crying a lot. He's crying a lot. He's playing music a lot. He gets out and dances in the streets before God and looks undignified, in his own words, to the point where one of his wives at the time was kind of turning her nose up at it. She wasn't a fan of it. So in the same way, and I think a lot of people would say getting really into music and feeling your body and dancing and crying a lot, being really in touch with those softer emotions, I think a lot of people would say those are feminine behaviors. I don't know if I agree. I don't know if I disagree. That's why I said masculinity is a calling, right? Because I think women can exhibit leadership, strength, stability. They can exhibit all those things all they want. What's important, though, is for us to fulfill our callings within marriage, right? Because again, biblical masculinity is prescribed mostly in contexts, right? It doesn't mean that if a woman walks outside her house, she needs to submit to every man on the street. That's not what that's about, right? A lot of those biblical callings are within the context of marriage. And so to answer your question, Dalton, I think it's, women, they can do whatever they want. I'm a big fan of women empowerment, but I will say God's design for marriage is probably the way it should be done. You know what I mean? If you want to go run a company, go run a company. I know some women actually, one of my mentors that I really respect, his wife is this powerhouse of an executive, but in their marriage, she is the feminine and he is the masculine. And I think it takes some maturity to do that. And I think a lot of my followers, that doesn't compute for them because they want to make sure everybody's in their little boxes because everybody's safe in the little boxes. But I think when you look at biblical prescription for those behaviors, it's really in, those man-female roles are in the context of marriage, in the context of church. They're not really, you can't go work or you can't, it's really less complicated, I think, than people make it.
It takes a level of maturity to challenge the box that you've been put in, I guess. Whether
We
you
like
agree
boxes.
with,
Boxes keep us safe.
yeah,
If I can stay in my little box and have my little opinions, and it saves energy too, right? I think it's, you could argue that that's kind of a biological survival deal. Like we can save a lot of energy with assumptions and categories, and it's just kind of nice, right? It's predictable, it's easy, but it's not always right.
yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm. I mean, could go into politics and all that in the boxes that people like to put themselves into.
Oh yeah, man, it's everywhere. It's everywhere.
Yeah.
It's everywhere.
I love that. That's one thing
Yes.
with different religions. Like when like before we started, we were like, well, you're a Baptist, you're this or that. It's like, it's great because like you stick yourself in the Baptist box and it's like, okay, now I have to be all Baptist. It's like, well, no, you need to put
Yeah.
yourself in the biblical box, open the Bible,
Right. Yeah.
and see what God's box is for you. And so,
Exactly.
and yeah, that's where I think that heads. But yeah, I love it, man. You've definitely thought a lot of this out. This is good stuff.
Yeah. It doesn't take much to get me going, man. Yeah. But no, Jesus doesn't really play with boxes very much. He has his own boxes, kind of his very binary, stuff that he teaches. But as far as the boxes that we as humans have created, he doesn't really play in those. So
Yeah. Yeah.
That's a good point. So, I mean, we talked a little bit about emotions and are they male or female or masculine, whatever.
mhm.
In your experience, like what role does vulnerability play, like in Christian masculinity and being?
Yeah, sure. So vulnerability is so misunderstood. There are times when a leader needs to be vulnerable. So if a king loses a son, right, he needs to cry. He needs to cry and it needs to be public. He needs to be vulnerable and show his mourning to everybody who's watching. Okay. That's good leadership. It demonstrates, hey, it's okay to mourn and grieve about things that are sad. On the same token, if that king is in a battle with his troops the very next day and he is concerned and maybe panicking on the inside that they're not going to win, that they're going to be overrun by the enemy, he can't show that. He cannot be vulnerable in a sense at that time because that would be poor leadership. He needs to project strength, stability, and vision to his troops, not the fear that he's feeling, right? So I think a good, strong, masculine man is somebody who knows that his feelings don't own him, and he shows and shares feelings not as a service to himself, but as a service to others. And then there are also times when a man should be vulnerable, truly, just kind of letting it all out. And David actually is a great example of this. In the Psalms, he's extremely vulnerable. You could almost say he's wishy-washy. Sometimes in the same verse, he's, crying his eyes out here and then celebrating the faithfulness of God here more toward the end, or at least anchoring himself with, hey, I know God's going to come bail me out of this at some point. But that's why men need to walk in community. In the context of marriage, I think the 2023 man probably is vulnerable with his wife too much. He's probably dumping his emotional instability on her. But the problem is she doesn't have that masculine bucket to put it in. She's supposed to be the one that's kind of all over the place, and you're supposed to be the bucket. So when you're all over the place and she's all over the place, now there's no polarity, there's no attraction, and there's no dynamic there of a give and take and a dance. So I think in those cases, when a man really wants to just lose it, he needs to go find brothers to lose it with that we can understand him better anyways, or talk to God. Definitely talk to God, but also to brothers, to fellow men.
So it takes a level of discernment whether or not you expose that emotion, and you're doing it as a service, as a indicator of leadership rather than just an outpour of emotion.
Right. And I think, that's not to say that men should never share their feelings with their wives, because you do want there to be emotional connection there, right? You can't be distant. If you're having a terrible day at work and you feel like you want to quit your job, that's a real thing. But you don't come home in a puddle of tears. You come home and you still maintain that strength and that vision and that frame, and you say, hey, yeah, not gonna lie, today was crazy at work. Maybe you want to throw in the towel, honestly, but we'll get through it. Be real, but also be real in the confidence you have in the faithfulness of God to provide for you, to get you through. So you do want to be able to connect and share, but true vulnerability of exposing all the craziness that's inside of you, it's kind of like that king on the battlefield. Probably not the right move.
I am curious. I feel like probably everyone's seen reels like this that are going around where this random guy will walk up to a couple girls with the microphone and be like, would you be okay if your man cried in front of you? And all the girls would be like, yes, that's perfectly fine.
Yeah.
And
Uh-huh.
on the inside, you're like, I don't know. Well, what's your take on that?
Yeah. Again, let's, contextualize the type of girls that he's approaching, and the context and where they're at and what caliber of women those probably are. But I would say everyone wants to think that they would be the bigger person, right? These women, they want to think that if their man broke down and cried to them, that they would be totally okay with that. And in a sense, they might be, but it would be in more of a motherly way, right? It would trigger her nurturing instinct. It would trigger her, oh, you poor baby kind of instinct. Cute, like puppy dog cute, not like, attracted to you cute, if that makes sense. So they would probably be okay with it, but what they don't realize is that's going to erode at the attraction they have toward him. And it's going to switch the attraction based love to more of a motherly nurturing based love. And not that would end the relationship or destroy things, but if that continues to happen over a period of time, she's going to wake up one day and realize, yeah, it's not the same anymore. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's a really good explanation.
I think that's completely the eyesight that you have to look through is what type of woman is it that's okay with you breaking down in front of them, and why are they okay with you crying in front of them? I think.
Yeah.
So it's
more questions than answers there.
Yeah. So it's I don't know. I think it's kind of a silly question to start with. Why would you want to know? Why would a man want to know if it's okay for a woman to see you cry? Like,
yeah,
if you're going through something emotional and you break down, everybody has those moments. So I think there's a lot of other questions that could be asked there. But I don't know. I'll leave it at that.
good place to leave it.
Like, how can men support and uplift one another in their journeys of self-improvement? I know you mentioned, rather than going and expressing those emotions to, say, your partner, going and getting with a group of guys that are probably in the same mindset or headed in the same direction you are.
It's tough, man, because it's harder and harder to find men. A lot of guys say that there's no more good girls anymore. I think there's less good men, if I'm being honest. Like men that are really trying to do this stuff the right way and not just succumb to their emotions and not be these vulnerable puddles on the floor that don't have a backbone. I see a lot of that, especially nowadays. I see less, but still a significant amount of guys that are kind of in this masculine resurgence, that I like to think I'm a part of. But a lot of us in that group we tend to suppress things more, and we tend to err more on the side of not crying, right? Err on the side of, I'm going to tough it out. I'm going to kind of lean into my own strength. But I think that goes against what Christ calls us to. So the true bravery, that's braver than letting your emotions overwhelm you and braver than just stuffing them back down, is to let them come out, look them in the eye and surrender them to God and say, hey, this is what it is. God, I need you to help me process this like a healthy human being. And he's prescribed that we do that in community. So that's something I try to work hard on, like in my in-person circles here in Northwest Arkansas, having guys, mentors, peer levels as well, that I can go confess things to, that I can go kind of offload to and vent to. As far as how we can support each other, man, it probably wouldn't hurt just to have a regular check-in with your bros and say, hey, dude, how's it been? Is there anything you need to talk about, confess? Is there anything that's stressing you out, man? Any way I can pray for you? It's hard to do much more than that kind of out on a regular basis, but just opening that door, just casually every now and then, because a lot of times Satan convinces us that we're walking alone and we have this feeling of being alone. And the truth is, man, I'm sure any one of us on this call could probably tell the other guy something, and it would be received with love and wisdom and acceptance. But that's not something we think about. We just think about that it's all on our shoulders. So that initiative to reach out and say, hey, brother, how you doing? What's going on here? Keeping track with things that they've talked about in the past. I think that's huge. It's meant a lot to me when guys have done that for me.
Yeah, that random check-in. Hey, how are you doing, man? If you ever need to talk, yeah, I'm here. That sort of thing.
Yeah,
I know Dalton's had to put up with some of my, hey, man, got a second?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And it's great when we're vulnerable and kind of maybe desperate enough to initiate that when we need it. That's really good too. But sometimes we'll see each other at church or at, group functions, outings, whatever it is within the friend group, and we'll have maybe deep conversations, but we won't have personal conversations. We don't open those doors. So
yeah, I like that. It kind of goes with, like, I don't know where I adopted this from. I think it was from my dad, but he was always telling me, like, hey, you ever need life advice, you go, especially Christian life advice, like, you go to somebody that's like 3-4 times your age, like, unless you're just venting, like, okay, vent to your friend, but if you want, guidance, like, go talk to somebody that knows something. And so that's what I've always tried to do. Like, if I want to vent, like, I'll vent, but at the same time, and then you have those old friends that you can vent to and get advice. So those are the best.
Yep. 100%. It's good to have that mix, man, because you have those older guys that have been through more life than you, have more experience than you, more knowledge than you, but they may not have as much knowledge of you as one of your homies does, right? So it's good to get perspective from both of those sides. I found the sweet spot for me is a guy that's about 15, 20 years my senior, that I can still kind of relate to, because, I'm 30, so 15 older than me is 45. So we're not in entirely different life stages, but it's different enough to where he's been down the road, but he can still kind of relate to me a little bit.
It seems like in today's day and age, masculinity is under attack, but or at least men are under attack. What is your argument for, like, why masculinity, male leadership is necessary or important? So, like, why not shy away from the challenge, of stepping up?
Yeah, dude, I would just ask Adam, dude. Ask him how that went, where he abnegated his position of leadership. And, it's as old as time, man. God designed the world to be led by men in the context of marriage. Not that women can't have leadership positions. That's happened in scripture. There's examples of that, not knocking that. But whenever the fall of humanity happened in the Garden of Eden, history remembers that as Adam's fault, because he was the man, right? Eve was the first one who took the bite of the forbidden fruit. Eve was the one that was originally deceived. But who did God come looking for? Adam, right? And he immediately said, oh, no, no, no. It was the woman you gave me. Which is that's our typical response, man. In more ways than one, we typically like to say, oh, women, they're going to do what they're going to do. They're crazy. They don't think like we do, blah, blah, blah. We come up with all these excuses to abnegate, to step away from our calling, right? And then the consequences of that are always evil. They're always disastrous. Because in that same way that we provide that structure and that space, that kind of container for the feminine to play in, that container also protects her, right? And when we remove that structure of masculine groundedness from a family, from a community, from a society or country, it becomes exposed to corruption and exposed to evil. In America, like the modern West, dude, we're just in a little bubble, man. That's the sad part is, humans don't live long enough to understand. It's like we're a bunch of fish in a river, and people tell us that the ocean exists, but we can't comprehend that because we've only ever been in the river, right? So right now we're in this river, and the ocean, the reality is a society that is not, that doesn't have a lot of masculine leadership in it is going to get ruined. It's going to get wrecked. But guys our age, we've only had this river of prosperity and safety and comfort in the modern West anyway, Eastern Europe excluded. But yeah, it's going to pop, man. This is not going to last.
That's kind of where my head's been at with it. The whole masculinity under attack is like it's definitely temporary, but it's all going to come down at some point.
And in speaking of Eastern Europe, like if you're boots on the ground in Ukraine, nobody's got time to be confused about gender. Nobody's got time to worry about how they identify. Nobody's got time to F the patriarchy. No one's got time for any of that, right? Because they're too busy in the real world being how it's been for the large majority of human existence, right? It's more law of the jungle than law of the Discord admin or the Facebook censorship, right? Those are all luxuries that we have that spoil us, right? But man, you unplug the power, things get back to normal real quick.
Oh, yeah. That perspective shift. I like that.
I heard a comedian once, gosh, I can't remember his name. He is so witty though. He said, man, y'all really timed feminism really well. Y'all timed feminism right along with, y'all timed feminism right along with central heating and air. Yeah. Feminism came up right around the same time as central heating and air, It's good timing for that. So yeah, I would have to agree. I say touche, brother. That's a good point. Like the women's rights weren't as important when the men were out in the cold and when the men were facing the wilderness and when the men were fighting each other. It just wasn't as big of a deal. So,
yeah, there's a good point you made where you unplug the power and then everything goes back to normal. Yeah, big perspective shift as soon as that's taken away. Yeah.
One of my bosses actually gave me, back in my former careers, he gave me a really good picture. He said, if you're in a group of people, right, you're at a boardroom, you're doing a project with your team or whatever, in your white collar job or whatever it is, there will be positional leaders, right? But if a tornado blows through and cuts out the lights and everybody thinks, oh, this could get bad, that's when the real leader shows up, right? And it's usually not the person who has that position, right? And the same thing would happen with all sorts of the confusion that we have going on nowadays. The sting of reality has kind of that clarifying effect to it.
That's a good picture. Going back to the self-improvement, self-development, finding masculinity, like what are some books or habits that you recommend, for people that want to pursue self-development, becoming a better person, finding their masculine calling? What were some of the books that you started reading or places you went to look?
Yeah, so I got to be careful with that because I haven't written my book yet. So uh, I do plan to, though, and address these topics in a way that I'm 100% in support of, obviously. Like I said earlier, the church didn't have a whole lot that helped me with what I was going through. That being said, the stuff that did help me was also inclusive of a lot of things I don't agree with, right? So it kind of makes it tricky to recommend books. So that's the disclaimer. Relentless by Tim Grover, Michael Jordan's trainer. Very interesting take sort of into the dark side of masculinity that we don't know how to integrate as, Christian nice guys, if you will. Very helpful book. Relentless, Tim Grover. No More Mr. Nice Guy is a classic. Can't remember the guy's name who wrote that, but there's only one of its kind. No More Mr. Nice Guy. Wild at Heart by John Elders. That's good kind of introductory reading if you're kind of poking down that masculinity mindset trail for the Christian man. But I think also Old Testament reading from the Bible is super helpful. There's a lot there told in story form that you can start to absorb if you're really looking for it. But just seeing so much of what's broken nowadays is, we're kind of knee-jerking back to this idea of, men need to be confident, men need to be strong, we need to be secure in ourselves and lead our families. That's all good. But if it's based and rooted in self, it's still destructive. I made a post just recently about Andrew Tate, talking about how he's leading this voice of masculine resurgence, returning to strength, returning to more tradition, more traditional roles of male, female. And I said, hey, I'm going to admit it. Society is more easily attacked by evil when men are weak. Andrew Tate's trying to make men strong. Okay. So I'm going to admit that there's some good to that. But what I'll also say is Satan is fine with men being strong as long as they're strong in themselves and not strong in Christ. Satan still wins in that scenario. So the trick is rooting and grounding the identity in who God says you are, right? So as you, read these books, definitely follow my Instagram, wait for me to publish mine too. But as you read these different books, keeping that in mind, this is the true masculine strength is grounded in truth. It's grounded in eternity. It's grounded in what God says you are, not what a book says you are, not what you say you are, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Going along with your disclaimer here. Like, I made a post about this, man, a few months ago. It's like, don't take everything at face value. Do your own research.
Yep.
I mean,
Yeah.
I think just because it's there doesn't mean it's true. So don't just accept it. I mean, there's a good thing that there are opposing opinions out there, because then it questions what you believe and then makes you a little bit more grounded in what you believe, because you have to think about their side, their opinion.
Yep.
Yeah, I was wondering how you define, because this is something that I kind of think on quite a bit. Should I be nice or should I just be, a 2x4?
Sure.
So what's your definition, or what do you think is the common definition of being a nice guy?
A nice guy is someone who presents as agreeable, soft, accommodating, servant, all good things. But he does that from a position of fear and not love. That's the main difference, is if you're doing something out of fear, doing or not doing something out of fear of a reaction, or because you're trying to get some sort of reciprocity from that, some reciprocal gain from that, then you're being a nice guy. The nice guy does chore play. The nice guy does things for his wife in hopes that he's going to get something back. The nice guy has a great weekend with his family and he gets scared and he says, oh, things are finally good with my wife. I'm going to make sure I don't jinx this. And he immediately slips into fear. Now he's walking on eggshells. He's trying not to jinx it, right? And whenever the masculine is walking from a position of fear, he's no longer able to be that strong frame that he needs to be. The flip side is you can be soft, tender, accommodating, agreeable, servant. You can be all those things, but if you're doing it from a place of abundance and love, there's just going to be an energy shift. There's going to be a sense of power and purpose behind that, right? So sometimes it takes a while to smell a nice guy. It'll be kind of over time. Sometimes they present really obviously, but there's a place for tenderness and love and servant-heartedness for all of us, honestly, you know? I think the 2x4 analogy that you gave is key, because sometimes guys can be too blunt, right? And they're just like, hey, this is how it is, deal with it, right? Okay. There's a way you can present really hard truths in a gracious way, right? The nice guy is very gracious and he doesn't present the hard truths either. That's what we want to avoid.
Yeah, it's a good way to look at it. You have
I'll
to
give
have
you
an
an
equal
example.
balance of both.
Yeah. So example, you know, let's say I'm getting a cold shoulder from my wife. It's been a couple days. She's just been treating me coldly, man. Like something's off, right? I got no clue what it is. I'm typical male. I'm dense. I don't know what's going on. I don't think I did anything wrong, but shoot, something's up, right? The nice guy does this. He goes up and says, hey, baby, have I done anything wrong lately? That's what the nice guy does. And he does that because he's trying to play this martyr where he's going to absorb, he's going to make it about himself, right? And he's not going to ask the real question, right? That's not the real question. The real question is, hey, listen, I've felt like that you've been giving me the cold shoulder. Is that right? Or am I misreading something? You know, because it hurts my feelings to feel this way. You know, that's kind of that vulnerable but not whiny middle ground that we need. Whereas the hyper masculine kind of chauvinist guy is saying, what's your problem? You just get to say, hey, what's your problem? You've been off lately, right? You know, and that's probably one of the nicer ways to put that. But does that make sense? The nice guy, he's coming at it from the back door. He's beating around the bush. He's not asking the real question that's on his mind. And so he can't present with strength and congruence that way.
I like that.
How do you make that shift from because like you said, like some of the nice guy qualities are good, but you know, you're still the nice guy. You're still almost a pushover, you know? How do you make that shift from, you know, being just a nice guy to being actual, like doing it from a place of caring?
Yeah, brother, it's tough. I think there's a lot of places we could go with that. Some commonalities that I see are nice guy behavior, especially with women. Some guys are just nice guys, period. Like they're nice guys with their boss. They're nice guys with their coworkers, you know, they're kind of these pushover guys in general. It's all fear-based. We'll go ahead and land on that. It's all fear-based, but it's different fears for different guys. Typically with the wife, it's fear of losing sexual intimacy is what it's rooted in. So a lot of guys, especially Christian guys, they kind of struggle with lust on and off until they get married. And then they get married and they think, okay, finally, this is going to be great. I have an outlet for my sexual desires. But they've never really got them under control. They've never submitted them to God. Those desires are still having a ruling influence in their lives. And they've learned, which is not too hard to learn, that you tend to have more sexual intimacy when your wife is happy, right? And because they are so dependent on that sex drive, and they have now hopefully successfully regulated their expression of sexual intimacy to one woman, to their wife, now they're trapped in this rock and a hard place where she's the only outlet that my controlling sexual desires can have their way. but also that only happens when she's happy with me. So now, because I am enslaved to my sexual desires, I am now enslaving myself to making her happy, which leads to these placating behaviors. It leads to these people-pleasing behaviors. It leads to passive aggression. It leads to suppressing how I really feel so that she doesn't have an emotional reaction, so that maybe our relationship can get better, so that maybe I can get what I want, right? And it just utterly destroys any sort of masculine, feminine polarity that was there to start with.
Okay.
So it's all about figuring out what's the why for you, you know? I like to give guys, if it's in person, I'll give them like a small notebook or a journal, and we'll identify like a target behavior, right? Like, you know, I start raising my voice, or maybe I watch pornography or whatever it is. Or maybe I binge eat. Okay, when that happens, let's write down how you're feeling around that time, right? Because it's different. It's different for everybody. What are the feelings that you're feeling around that time? And then how can we take a couple steps back and address the root causes of those feelings before they trigger you to do that behavior that you don't want to engage in? And that would apply to nice guy behaviors as well. So it's a very individualized approach to that, but it's all fear-based at some level.
Interesting. Yeah, okay. Well, I mean, that's a good start to fixing that problem, is realizing that it is fear-based.
Yep.
I mean, what's your position on fitness, like fitness for men? And I know you mentioned Andrew Tate, and he's very big into, you know, go get a six-pack. What is
Sure.
your perspective on that, when it comes to, you know, self-improvement, self-discipline?
Sure. My position on fitness, I think, is about 10-20% driven from a biblical place of we need to be healthy to pursue with our fullest vigor the callings that God has placed in front of us. And if we're on, you know, podcasts all day long, that's not going to happen. So we need to do something with our bodies, right? One extreme is the astronauts in space have to do all this crazy stuff because there's no gravity up there. It's not that bad for us, but there's really not a lot of movement in, you know, our white collar jobs, or even some blue collar jobs that are just kind of sitting down doing handwork or, you know, craftsmanship and that kind of things. So there's about 20% motivated with that, you know, being active, moving, getting around. But I'd say 80% of it, dude, is just looking at that, again, that bubble that we're in for the past 150 years or so with the rise of the Industrial Revolution. Our society just hasn't had to move as much, and it's had a negative effect on men as a whole, whether it be our testosterone, our confidence, our kind of body confidence. Not in the sense of I look good in my body, but I trust my body. If I need to go jump over something, I'm confident to do that. Or if I need to go balance on top of something, I can do that, you know? You turn 22, 23, 24, spend 5 years off your feet, grinding away at your career. You wake up one day and you're my age, and you might be surprised. Oh, like I thought I could kind of run and juke and spin around like I used to, but I haven't done it in so long that I've lost that ability. And that's a societal issue that I think it's not biblically addressed, because it just, for only a fraction of human existence have we dealt with this kind of pandemic level comfort and satiation and ease, right? And it's not good. It's not good for us.
Do you encourage your clients to get in the gym?
Getting in the gym, I mean, technically, not necessarily, but as long as they're doing some heavy sort of work on a regular basis, you know, using their bodies, straining, sweating, exerting, yeah, we're good. But yeah, that's, if you're not doing that as a man, you're definitely living in the bubble that we're in, and it's not healthy for you.
Okay. So Luke, if people want to work with you, or they're interested in learning more about you, where can they find you?
Yeah, I'm pretty good on DMs on Instagram. So I just recommend reaching out there. You can also shoot me an email. Right now, I just have a Gmail account that I'm using, just narrowwayman@gmail.com. You can, if you're not on Instagram, you can find me there. And then, yeah, that's it. Narrowwayman, hit me up. I've got a course launching, a group cohort at the end of June. It's going to be a fraction of the cost of my normal coaching, but going through a lot of that content just about getting the fire back in your eyes as a man and restoring the masculine drive that I think a lot of us have lost. So I'm stoked for that.
Sweet. Yeah, I'm excited to see that come out. But anyway, man, thanks for hopping on, and catch y'all later.